Nobody ever hit me. And as strange as that may sound, there were times I almost wished they had. Not because physical abuse is somehow easier, but because maybe I would have recognized what was happening. Maybe I would have realized I was being abused before it stole years of my life. And at least I would have been able to see my attacker clearly. Instead, I spent years believing the attacker was me. And before I go any further, I want to say one thing. These last 3 videos weren't an accident. I knew they needed to be made before I could move on. Because everything I've talked about on this channel since the beginning, the rebuilding, finding peace, learning to trust myself again, it all started here. If I skipped over this part of the story, nothing else I've shared would have really made sense. So this is the last conversation I want to have about the abuse itself. After this, I want us to get back to rebuilding, to getting older, to starting over, and ultimately to thriving. And and also to become stronger than the people who tried to break us. But before I could do that, there was one more truth that I needed to say out loud. I've been thinking a lot since I've made those last 2 videos. The first one was about the lies we tell ourselves after we leave. And the second was about the lies that we tell ourselves while we're still trapped in it. And, but I think they both miss the biggest truth. Abuse is abuse. The only difference is one leaves bruises, the other leaves questions. If someone punches you in the face, nobody argues about whether you've been hurt. The bruises tell the story. The broken bones tell the story. The police report tells the story. In the emergency room, that really tells a story. Everybody immediately knows who the victim is. But what if someone spends years convincing you that you're the problem? What if they slowly destroy your confidence? What if they make you question your own memory, your own judgment, and your own reality? What if they slowly convince you that every argument is your fault? Every problem is somehow your responsibility. What does that leave? Well, no black eye, no broken nose, no cast, no stitches, just a human being who slowly stops trusting themselves. And here's the part that still bothers me. When the abuse is over, how do you prove it? How do you prove years of manipulation? How do you prove gaslighting? How do you prove walking on eggshells every single day of your life? How do you prove the 1,000 little comments that nobody else hears? The guilt, the control, the silent treatments, the constant feeling that no matter what you did, it was never enough. You can't take a picture of it. You can't show somebody an x-ray of a broken self. You can't point to a scar and say, there, that's where they destroyed my confidence. That's why emotional abuse is so difficult. Not because the damage isn't real, but because the evidence doesn't look like people expect it to. And if you've never lived through it, it's almost impossible to explain, but it's even more impossible to even understand. Looking back, I honestly don't know the day that I started disappearing. I can't tell you which conversation changed me. I can't tell you which argument finally broke me. Because that's not how it works. It happens so slowly that one day you realize you've become somebody you don't even recognize anymore. People ask me all the time, why didn't you just leave? And I don't think that's the right question. The better question is, why didn't I realize I needed to? Because I wasn't trying to survive abuse. I was trying to save my marriage. Those are two completely different things, and I didn't know the difference. I spent years believing that if I could just become a better husband, a calmer husband, a more patient husband, everything would finally get better. But looking back at it now, I wasn't trying to fix a marriage. I was trying to solve a problem that couldn't be solved. And somewhere along the way, I stopped asking whether I was being treated fairly and started asking what was wrong with me. That's what emotional abuse stole first. Not my marriage, not my house, not my business. It stole my ability to trust myself. And when that happens, everything else becomes a whole lot easier to take from you. And I think that's why this has bothered me so much these last few years. It's not because I need revenge and not because I'm angry, but because I keep asking myself the same question. If emotional abuse can destroy your confidence, your health, your identity, your peace, and years of your life, why do so many people still act like it's somehow less serious? And I think I know the answer. Because people believe what they can see. Bruises are easy to understand. A black eye doesn't need an explanation. A broken arm doesn't need witness. But emotional abuse asks people to understand something that they can't see. And that's hard. Sometimes it's even hard for the person living through it. I know, because I was that person. When my marriage ended, I wasn't trying to explain one terrible day. I was trying to explain 10 years of 1,000 little moments, and that's almost impossible. How do you explain being blamed so many times that eventually you start blaming yourself? How do you explain questioning your own memory or your own reality? How do you explain the feeling of walking into your own home, wondering which version of someone you're going to meet that day? None of those things leave bruises, but every one of them leaves damage. That's why I don't think emotional abuse is made up of one catastrophic event. I think it's death by 1,000 paper cuts. One paper cut isn't life changing, neither are 10. But thousands over years, it eventually changes who you are. And by the time you realized what's even happened, you can't point to one cut. You can only point to the person that you've become. I think that's one of the reasons people who survive emotional abuse struggle to explain it. We're trying to explain or describe an entire environment, not one incident. That's a lot harder. People naturally ask, what happened? Sometimes the only honest answer is everything. Everything happened. Every little piece added up. Every little compromise, every little apology, every little moment that you ignored because you thought it wasn't a big deal. Until one day, you weren't you anymore. That's what happened to me. And maybe that's why, I started this channel in the first place. People think I've spent these last years rebuilding my finances or rebuilding my property or rebuilding my life. But that's only part of it. The biggest rebuild has been learning to trust myself again, learning that my thoughts matter and learning that my feelings matter. Learning that peace isn't something that you apologize for wanting. It's not a want, that's a need. You know, that's been the real rebuild. The old mobile home, the 10 acres, the old truck. No, those are just the backdrop. The real story has always been about becoming the man I was before I forgot who he was. Maybe that's why these last three videos mattered so much to me. I couldn't keep talking about rebuilding without finally talking about exactly what I was rebuilding from. Now I have. And honestly, I think it's time to close that chapter. Not because it isn't important, it is. And not because it didn't change me, it did. But because I refuse to let the worst chapter of my life become the whole story, it isn't. The abuse is part of my story. It is not my identity. The rebuilding is. Finding peace is. Becoming stronger is. Learning to enjoy life again is. Those are the things I want this channel to be remembered for. So if you've been with me through these last videos, thank you. I know these conversations aren't easy and a lot of them are very heavy. But I also know they're necessary because somewhere there's someone watching this still wondering if what they're living through is real. Still wondering if they're the problem. Still waiting for bruises that will never come. If that's you, please hear me. You don't need visible scars for your pain to be real. You don't need someone else to validate your experience before you're allowed to acknowledge it. And you don't have to spend the rest of your life carrying someone else's lies. For me, these last three videos were about understanding where my rebuilding began. The next ones, they're about where it can lead. Because after everything I've lived through, I can finally say something that I thought I'd never be able to say. I'm at peace. And after spending years believing that I was the attacker or the problem, I've finally learned to be on my own side again. You don't need other people to understand. Just got to be on your own side. Y'all, I'll see you in the next one.